Mike Gill, Hunter Brody. Geoff Mosher is in for today's Football at 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. We got a lot of NFL, a lot of Eagles to get into on this Mosher Monday. Moshe, what's up, pal?
Hello, fellas. How are you?
Greetings and some salutations to you. It's a interesting day, obviously. A lot of Eagles stuff to get into, but we want to start with the news over the weekend, and we just kind of got done talking about it. I don't know. Do you take the NFL Roger Goodell video as a Friday news dump, or do you put some more significance? Because typically a 5:30 Friday is like, hey, this is strategically placed here. Am I being cynical? Because I'm not in this instance. I do give him I had to look at I told Broads, I had to look at the Twitter handle 50 times over to see if it was a fake.
That's funny.
I literally did. I was like, is this a real? Am I getting? Is this,
I know.
I thought it was a fake. I thought it was fake.
Yeah, it was very surprising, although not really. Yes, surprising because the NFL for so long had been almost, I don't want to say refusing to acknowledge what the players were saying. Obviously, they had donated the $90 million to social justice causes when Malcolm Jenkins and got the committee with Torrey Smith and some other players around the league to get the NFL to kick in. But certainly the kneeling, the protesting, what the players said that they were protesting, the police brutality, the injustice. It seemed like the NFL was just fine to write a check and not really address it head on. And certainly in that video, Roger Goodell addressed the issues that the players were kneeling about and admitted that the NFL was wrong not to be a little bit more, a lot more, agreeable and understanding of the situation. But I think what really sticks in my craw in this situation is that Roger Goodell did that video and never said the name Colin Kaepernick. And I think that, I don't know if there's anything that happened between the lawsuit between them where he can't. I imagine that's not the case. I think he could have said the name Colin Kaepernick. But the fact that he went that far with the video but stopped short of saying Colin Kaepernick, to me, means that he didn't go he didn't walk the entire walk. He walked all the way up until the finish line and then just kind of stopped right at the finish line. As far as your news dump theory, which is interesting because it did come out at that kind of time, I question anymore if that whole Friday news dump is as impactful as it used to be because of social media. I think that it's almost hard to release anything of significance anymore at any time without it becoming a quote unquote thing because of social media, because it can reach so much audience so fast. It used to be that if you'd release something, Friday at 5:00, that most of the writers at newspapers weren't there or they're off, especially in the summer, or that the TV people are down to their weekend crew. It just wasn't going to get the same amount of attention. But I don't know that social media allows for the Friday news dump anymore.
Yeah, how much do you think that the Drew Brees stuff that kind of got the ball rolling with this, with both sides, and then Brees, apologizing, and then people saying he didn't need to apologize, and then him basically tweeting the president saying, nope, I don't need your backing here. I'm okay with my apology. How much do you think a lot of this that the NFL looked at and said, hey, look, where we were 4 years ago, we have changed our stance. We have more information. We have learned more. And, in other words, do you take the NFL at its word, or is this just a video to try to appease people?
That's a really good question, Mike. And it's hard to say what Roger Goodell said and then backtrack or not put those words into action. But I am very curious to see what happens when the NFL season begins. If you'll see players kneeling during the anthem, and if the NFL will try to have any sanctions against that. It would be almost hypocritical at this point, again, if they did try to sanction it based on what Roger Goodell said. So I'm very curious to see. I don't think that Goodell put this video out and then that's it until the season. I think he's going to do a lot of talking with the players. I think you're going to hear a lot about these conversations that the owners and the players are having together, and what kind of initiatives they can take together. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that as the weeks go on, or if there are no initiatives, you'll probably be hearing the players say that was just a lot of lip service and there's been no action since.
Well, Adrian Peterson did come out publicly and say he will be kneeling during the national anthems. But do you think the NFL should even care about the ratings, whether they will be hurt by this or not?
Well, Hunter, that's a good question.
I will say this real quick. Keep in mind that 2016, the ratings took a dip. But some people attribute it to the kneeling. Others would say, well, it was an election year. You also have an election year this year, and I know there's many games that are up against debates on Thursday nights. So, I mean, some of these ratings could just be the fact that we are in a very, a polarizing election year.
Yeah, it makes the whole subject of ratings difficult to contextualize anyway. I mean, we may be in a situation where NFL stadiums are 3/4 full, half full, 1/4 full, and that the people who would normally be going to games are probably going to be watching it on TV. So that's also going to impact ratings, which it may give the ratings a boost in that regard, right? I mean, we saw what happened with the NFL draft and how many people watched that because there was nothing going on. There's going to be everything going on, apparently, in sports when the NFL starts. So there's going to be other competing interests as well.
That's another good point. Hey, you're going to have a Monday night football game up against the NBA Finals potentially. So NFL games there might be more things going on that the ratings will take a dip, and people will suggest it's because of that. But it's the same as the last time. I mean, it was minimal.
Yeah, I mean, I go by the theory that people are going to watch, and a lot of people are going to watch football. And to be honest with you, I think I have no empirical evidence or data to suggest this. I'm just going off what I see with my eyes. But you're seeing people marching in protest across the country in every major city in America, minor towns as well, and you're seeing it in several other countries. And you know about the NFL and its desire to market itself to other countries. So if the thought process, and some of my cynical thinking thinks that Roger Goodell saw this going on before he came out with his statement, is that 4 years ago we were afraid of offending quote unquote a right leaning or conservative audience. Well, look around the world right now. More people, it's sure from my own eyes and what I see in marches going around the world, not just the country, there's a lot of people who are supporting protests and obviously the cause right now for justice for African Americans and against police brutality. So if this were a business decision based on ratings, and I don't think it is, but if Roger Goodell were making those decisions, or the owners were, no matter where the owners tend to lean, they have to also be looking at what's going on around the world and their audience, and potentially factoring in business from that vantage point. I don't think it's about the conservative audience anymore. I think it's about the entire planet, which they've been trying to market the sport to, and where people's allegiances are lying. And right now, looks like a lot of people are protesting and supporting of what the players were kneeling for years ago.
Absolutely. Geoff Mosher's with us, Football at 4 here. Now, obviously we still have a long way to go before we get to football or anything. However, you wonder what the NFL, if any, will they have any sort of follow-up to this? Do you think there needs to be a follow-up, or are you okay with that video and then that's it and we wait to training camp?
I'm pretty sure in that video, Roger Goodell said he was going to be talking with more players, specifically those who helped make the players video, and just players around the league to see what the league and what its players can do to help social justice causes. And so he said it. The words are in the video. I'm almost positive he did. So if like I said, if we'll find out in the coming weeks and months if that was just, opportune timed lip service, or if there's real plan, real action behind those words.
All right, Football at 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Let's dive into some things, because we talk about training camp and the fact that, hey, there's a lot of time. The NFL says it might not be as long because they're considering, Jeff, moving. They might not have mini camps, but they're considering moving the training camp dates up because of the fact that there were no mini camps. Is that something? Because last week we talked about the NovaCare Center is open, but for whatever reason, the Eagles coaches are not using it or utilizing it. But are we going to see earlier training camps?
Well, I'll just tell you what I've heard a little bit. You may see an earlier date for training camp, but that doesn't necessarily mean the practices are going to start on those days. I think you're going to have, for every team, players coming in from every area of the country. And in some areas of the country, you're seeing a spike again. And I think in Florida, they're having a big spike in COVID cases, right? So you're having all these players, all these coaches, maybe some administrators, I don't know, but that's at least, 100 to 120 people right there all coming in to different team facilities. And so because they're coming from all areas and nobody has seen them and the doctors haven't gotten their hands on them, I imagine that these players are going to have to undergo testing. And I'm sure some teams, if not all, are going to say, all right, you're here, we've tested you, now we want to quarantine you, or maybe we haven't been able to test you all, but we may need to quarantine you all in the hotel for a week or two so that we know that everybody is tested and now has been quarantined for a certain amount of time. Now we can get on the field. We've disinfected the place, and now we know what steps we can take. I can't imagine that everybody just shows up and then starts to practice. You still have locker room proximity issues and making sure that whoever's coming in from what area isn't carrying COVID. And remember, a lot of guys, a lot of people who are carrying COVID are asymptomatic. So there's got to be testing, and there's going to have to be frequent testing. It's not just you're tested at the start when you get there, and then maybe you quarantine for a little bit, and then that's it. So I think that there's just going to have to be a lot of medical precaution taken once this thing starts, and it's going to take some time. So yeah, they may move up the date of training camp, but the question I would have is, are you moving that up because you're getting extra practice time in, or just to get all the medical precautions in?
Do you think that the coaches are missing a big opportunity here not going into the NovaCare complex, or is it not that big of a deal because what they're getting done now is still beneficial enough?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hunter. I think that without players there, I can't see how the coaches could really be doing all that much other than having discussions amongst themselves. And those are discussions that can take place via Zoom. So I do agree with you, though. I think that it's a little bit easier when you've got everybody all together in an area and ideas are going back and forth. The technology can complicate it, and not everybody has the kind of attention span to want to stare into a screen as opposed to having real personal conversations. So I get that. I do think it hurts them a little bit. But without the players there, though, I just don't think it's going to have a huge impact because, if the players aren't there to be coached, then what really can you be doing inside the halls of that facility?
Yeah, and the NFL, by the way, is considering starting training camps a week or two earlier because of the no OTAs on the field. So that is something that is being contemplated. And, you guys discuss about the impact of the lost spring here. A lot of this is – you talk about the Zoom meetings and all that stuff. I mean, every team's kind of going through it, but, the impact is going. Do you think the impact will be felt on the field in terms of the quality of play? And we talked about the ratings. Could the lack of quality of play also be a factor because of the fact that they had no spring?
Yeah, I definitely think that's going to be a factor. I think it's going to hurt teams that have new coaches. I think it's going to hurt teams that have new quarterbacks. Some teams have both. I think it's going to hurt teams that have that spent heavily in free agency and brought in a lot of new names. I mean, how often do we talk about tackling and how tackling is really not what it used to be because the players don't put the pads on as much, they don't practice it as much, and it trickles down even to the college level. Well, this kind of falls under that same category, right? You have players who have to learn new playbooks, have to develop. And I shouldn't just say rookies and free agents. I mean, look at second-year players just here alone, like Andre Dillard and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who, most people will tell you in the NFL community that the biggest jump a player makes is between year one and year two. And those guys have also not had the ability to get on the field and show their coaches if they've made any improvements or just even get on the field to improve. So I think that impacts them too. So, yeah, I think it will be reflected in the play.
How about the injury factor? Do you think you will see more? I mean, the league is already known for players getting banged up every week.
Yeah, it's possible. I think I mentioned it with you guys last week, that normally in training camp, you report, you have your physical test. The next day is the first like practice. It's a light practice. Then they ramp you up. And by day 4, though, of training camp, 4 or 5, you're ready to put the pads on and have that first major pad practice. And I'd be shocked if that were the case this year. I mean, I don't know, but can you imagine getting all these guys with no OTAs? Like, you're just trying to get them to learn the playbook, and you're already starting to put the pads on and hit 4 or 5 days into training camp. I mean, I don't think you can afford to lose guys, even to minor injuries, for 2 or 3 weeks this summer, because you're so busy trying to get them sped up with what you're doing as a program and a playbook. So whereas in the past, missing some time in training camp could hurt you, this year I feel like it's going to be a double whammy.
Yeah, I want to, the whole injury thing, too. You got a guy like Deshaun Jackson who's coming back from injury. Obviously, we don't know what's going on with Alshon Jeffrey. The veteran players as well who are coming back from injury, not being able to rehab all offseason in the facility. That's another thing that hasn't really been taken into account. Now, was there a report today that they were open to considering letting guys like that to start to come back into the facilities earlier?
There might have been. I'm not sure I saw that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, though. Aren't players allowed back at certain facilities?
I think
it's teams' decisions right now, right? That they're not back.
Yes. Now, one of the because the protocols were put out today, it's like a 9-page document, and Tier 1 includes players, coaches, trainers, doctors, and strength and conditioning coaches. And I'm imagining the players that they're including are those ones that are coming back from an injury situation.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
So I think it would make a lot of sense.
By the way, it was Tom Pelissero who tweeted that out earlier, saying no dates set yet, no mini camps expected, but the NFL and NFLPA are discussing the possibility of certain players, such as rookies and veterans who change teams and those who need physicals, returning to club facilities on a limited basis before June 26th.
Well, I think that would probably help things. I mean, especially if rookies and, like you said, the recovering players could get into the facilities and, take their physicals or get healthy. I think you'd see a little bit more of a return to normalcy if that were the case.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Football for here. I want to get into a couple quick Eagles topics. One, over at Pro Football Focus, they ranked their top 50 players for the 2020 season, which, we're getting ready for 2020. I was a little interested at number 15 on the list, which was Fletcher Cox. Are you surprised that he was ranked in the top, not only in the top 50, he came in at number 15, but he was also the number 2 overall defensive tackle in the entire league. Is that a little bit eye-opening?
It is, because take the NFL Network's annual top 100, right?
Yes.
That thing is about as credible as me trying to read a German Bible. Okay, it's just or just trying to speak a foreign language that I don't know. What that is reactionary to what happened the year before. It's almost like a fantasy football draft where guys who just had that breakout great year are all of a sudden in the top 5 when it may have just been one good year and a good scheme and things of that. But I like that PFF is looking at this in totality. Right. And not just saying, well, last year wasn't Fletcher Cox's best year. They're taking context. They know that he played way more snaps than ideally they would like him to play. They know about the injuries on the Eagles defensive line. They know that he probably faced more double and triple teams than most interior linemen do. So I think that they're taking all that into account and saying, yeah, maybe it wasn't his best year, but he was still a really good football player, and he is. And I think it's a fair argument to say that after Aaron Donald, he's the next best defensive tackle in football. I mean, there are some good ones. I mean, I don't know where – I'd be curious to see who they had as the third best TT and where that person wound up on the list.
Yeah, well, the number 1 overall player was Aaron Donald. He was the number 1 overall player in the entire league.
Doesn't surprise me.
Fletcher Cox was 15th, but that made him the second defensive tackle. I would have to pull up the third defensive tackle pretty quickly here, but by the way, also on the list was Brandon Brooks. He was the second-rated guard in the entire league and the fourth-rated offensive lineman. And then the third Eagle on that list, which I thought was the most surprising of all, was Brandon Graham, came in at number 49 on the list.
Well, I'll tell you this. I think PFF, and this is one of the things, I don't treat him as gospel, but I do like the fact that, look, they don't just take a defensive end and look at his stats. They look at a football player in totality. So Fletcher Cox is one of the best, not only interior pass rushing defensive tackles, but he's very good against the run, and he goes sideline to sideline about as well as any 300 and whatever pound guy in football. So take another really good defensive tackle like Chris Jones.
Chris
for the
Jones
Kansas
was
City
16.
Chiefs. Oh, so he's right under Fletcher Cox, right?
The next one, and then the next one after that's Grady Jarrett at 32.
I love Grady Jarrett, 32, good player. I think Fletcher is a little bit more well-rounded than Chris. Now he's a little older. Chris is a great interior pass rusher. Is he as good against the run and as rangy as Fletcher Cox? Might be a little bit of notch below, and that's why he's 16 instead of 15. Although there's not too many flaws to Chris Jones's game either. He could easily overtake Fletcher in the next year or two because he's so much younger. But same thing with Grady Jarrett, who I've watched a ton of tape on. The guy has an unbelievable club and under move. I mean, he's lightning quick, really good interior burst. Not as good against the run, though, and could be moved around a little bit more by offensive linemen than, say, Fletcher Cox does. So I can see why Fletcher is graded a lot higher.
When looking at that list, I find it hard to rate the difference between, how the right guard is compared to the defensive tackle or the safety or even the quarterback. I mean, the quarterback is the most important position. So, I mean, how do you choose when ranking this list?
Well, I think what they do, Hunter, is try to take positional bias out of it and then just assign a grade. And I hope I'm not speaking out of place here. I've talked to a lot of people who work for PFF. I don't know the formulas exactly. But what I think they try to do is just try to take the positional traits and then assign a grade for each specific trait of that position. And then the highest overall grade, they just make it formulaic, very statistical driven, so that the number just spits out who has the highest grade in totality compared to everybody else.
It says the list is not about how valuable players are, but rather how good they are regardless of position. A guard, corner, receiver, even a running back has just as good of a chance to appear on this list as a quarterback. It says we started from the standpoint of multi-year look at their grading before making adjustments based on situation, relevant injuries, and new circumstances that could change a player's future outlook. So, there's a lot that goes in here. Like, I think you're right. Like, they hey, this is the highest graded guy on our list. He's number 1, 2, based on however many years they went back. I'm not sure about that. But, again, Brandon Graham being on the list at 49. Now, there was a lot of edge rushers, so he was, one of many edge rushers. But, Fletcher Cox, I think my point of this, I think, when I read it was maybe we don't value Fletcher as much as we should.
Well, I mean, that goes back to when he, years ago, and he doesn't report to a voluntary OTA, and the city is like got nothing else to do, so it stands on top of its head about how detrimental this is and how much this is a reflection of a lack of leadership, and then they go on and win the Super Bowl, right? So I think we've seen that before when there's nothing to talk about, or when some guy wants to sit out for 3 days in an OTA, we tend to make a little bit more of it, or again. You look at Fletcher Cox's sacks, and they were down last year. And so it's like, all of a sudden he's not the player that he was. He still had a pretty good year. He's still a guy who helps your team because he commands 2 blockers on almost every single play, especially on pass rushing plays, and that makes it easier on other people. And then that's where it parlays, Mike, into the thinking on Brandon Graham, who I think is also sometimes underrated. PFF looks at Brandon Graham's resume, and what they see is he may not have 12, 13, 14 sacks, but he's constantly among the NFL defensive end leaders in tackles for a loss, in how well he plays the run, in hurries, in pressures. Yeah, he's not the type of guy who's built that he just takes these quarterbacks down all the time, but he's constantly moving the quarterbacks off their mark, which is a pressure and a hurry, which a lot of coaches will tell you can be as good as a sack, or just a little under.
Yeah, which is what they brought up for him, is the amount of quarterback pressures that he has had over the years, not the sacks, but the amount of pressures. 67 total pressures is what he ends up with. So, and this is something they said for the last decade that he has been one of the tops in that. Geoff Mosher has football at 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com, at Geoff Mosher NFL. He'll be back on Wednesday. Tomorrow, Andrew DeCecco's in. We will do more NFL and, of course, more Eagles. As always, football at 4 here, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. All right, Geoff, good conversation, man.
Great talking with you guys, fellas. Talk to you Wednesday.
And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.